Are you still writing medical records manually? Ease the mental load of your busy days with ScribeNote, the AI-powered veterinary soap creator that feels like having a personal scribe. I recently had a hectic 12-hour emergency shift when I saw more than 20 cases, and ScribeNote drastically cut my record-keeping time, letting me focus more on patient and client care. Trusted by clinics across North America, ScribeNote was created to reduce burnout and improve veterinary wellness. Try it today at scribenote.com with 50 free records. And Reviving Vet Med listeners get 100 free records with promo code RVM100. That's scribenote.com using promo code RVM100. Click the link in the show notes to start your free trial or book a demo today, and let ScribeNote simplify your day. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Reviving Vet Med. Today's episode is dedicated to navigating mental health conversations. This episode comes on the heels of Bell Let's Talk Day in Canada, which takes place every January. For those unfamiliar, Bell Let's Talk Day is an initiative that started in 2010 and is aimed at raising awareness and funding for mental health. On this day, Bell donates 5 cents for every tweet, text, TikTok video, or social media interaction using the hashtag #BellLet'sTalk. Over the years, it has sparked millions of conversations about mental health, breaking down stigma and encouraging people to reach out, seek help, and offer support. But even as society becomes more open to talking about mental health, these conversations remain challenging, especially in the profession of vet medicine, where stigma, burnout, and compassion fatigue are prevalent. So for today's conversation, we'll be recapping the statistics about mental health in our profession and discussing strategies for opening up the conversation about mental health with our colleagues. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the episode.
This is the Reviving Vet Med podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Marie Hollowaychuk. And my mission is to improve the mental health and well-being of veterinary professionals around the world.
So one of the biggest reasons that I chose this topic for the podcast is that one of the biggest questions that I get asked from individuals is, how do I talk to people about mental health? How do I open up the conversation? What is okay to say and not okay to say? And most of you know that I am a huge advocate for mental health and stigma reduction. And I recognize that a lot of this does come from stigma. And I've talked about stigma on the podcast before. That's not what we're going to discuss today. However, I do think it is important to break it down into some practical and tangible steps to have these conversations, because I know there's many of you out there that want to ask, you care, and you just don't really know what's okay to say and what's not okay and how to get started. So before we dig into the practical tips, I want to start by recapping the mental health landscape in vet medicine. Once again, I know that many of you listening are aware of these statistics, but I think it bears repeating to prevent the spread of misinformation and really just to get everybody on the same page as to what the research shows. So according to different studies that have been conducted worldwide, veterinarians and veterinary students experience mental health challenges at rates higher than the general population. So for example, 1/2 to 2/3 of vet students report symptoms of depression during their first year, and this is much higher than their peers in human medical school. Among veterinarians in practice, the 12-month prevalence for suicidal ideation is nearly 10 times that of the general population. And veterinarians show significantly higher scores for perceived stress, anxiety, depression, and secondary traumatic stress, once again compared to the general population. And according to the most recent Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing Study, serious psychological distress was twice as prevalent among non-veterinarian team members compared to veterinarians. So I want to be clear that these concerns do not just apply to veterinarians. In fact, the research shows that many of our veterinary technicians and animal care assistants or tech assistants are the most heavily affected. So these statistics highlight a critical need for action, and not just on an individual level, which is what we'll talk about today, but of course with the profession as a whole. And I am so grateful to see the leaps and bounds that we are taking in the profession to talk about these issues and to address them with stigma reduction programs and other initiatives that I will be talking about later on. So, why do we feel challenged when it comes to mental health conversations? Well, I think one of the reasons mental health struggles often go unaddressed in veterinary medicine is the stigma attached to it. I think that we've been conditioned to associate our identities with being caregivers and problem solvers and, people who have it all together. So admitting that we're struggling can feel like admitting failure, especially in a field where perfectionism and workaholism are so common. So I think there is this stigma and that we don't talk about it. This doesn't exist, so we're not going to ask. And what I hear a lot of individuals share as well is that they're worried that mental health conversations are going to be emotionally charged. They're concerned, what if my team member shares something and I don't know what to say? And this is challenging, I think, when a team member shares their experience with anxiety or depression. Others might feel ill-equipped to respond. They worry about saying the wrong thing, or they feel uncertain about how they can offer that meaningful support. But I want to be clear here that avoiding these conversations is not the answer. Silence only perpetuates stigma, and the consequences can be truly devastating, not just for the individual veterinary professional, but for teams, workplaces, and even patient care. I've spoken to individuals who have said, I asked somebody about their mental health and they, told me all this stuff and I didn't know what to say. So I just got quiet. And it is really that quiet that leads the other person to kind of think to themselves, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't said anything at all. So there isn't a right or a wrong thing to do in this situation, but we do want to avoid avoiding it, if that makes sense. So how can we navigate these conversations in a way that is compassionate, supportive, and productive? I'm going to share a bunch of strategies with you today. So before diving into any conversation about mental health, it's crucial that we establish a sense of psychological safety. So this means that we create an environment where people feel comfortable being vulnerable without fear of judgment or repercussions. If people are scared that there will be consequences if they speak up or share what they are truly experiencing, they're not going to do it. You need that foundation of psychological safety. So how do we do this? Well, we start by normalizing mental health discussions in everyday conversations. So for example, during team meetings, you might say, you know what, we know this work can be incredibly stressful and it's okay to talk about how you're feeling. Leaders can also set the tone by sharing their own experiences with stress or burnout, because this shows others that it's okay to open up. This is definitely a strategy that I have used when working with my teams, is that I take the first step in being vulnerable and sharing. And I don't do it in a way that's uncomfortable. I don't dump my entire personal mental health journey on my team. But if I'm having a day where I'm not feeling like my best self, if I'm feeling sad, if I'm feeling anxious, whatever it is that I'm bringing in, I talk about it. I open up, and that gives my team members the opportunity, number one, to offer me support, and number two, to feel that it's okay for them to have those same feelings and share them as well. So when someone does share their struggles, I want you to recognize that your role isn't to fix this. It is to listen and validate what they are going through. I think we get it in our heads as find it, fix it professionals that when someone shares something like a mental health challenge, we have to give them advice. We have to find a way to make it better. And that is not our job. Most of us are not trained mental health professionals, so we aren't in a position to offer that help. But what we can do is we can maintain eye contact. We can nod to show that we understand. We can listen without interruption, and then we simply reflect back what we've heard. This demonstrates that we heard the individual and we're validating what they're experiencing. So, for example, you might say, "It sounds like you've been feeling really overwhelmed lately." Or, "Wow, that sounds really hard. I'm so glad that you shared that with me." Okay? Phrases like, "just think positive," or "you'll get through it," are things that you want to avoid because they can really come across as dismissive, even though they're well-intentioned. I am an eternal optimist. I'm a very positive person. And I find myself even doing this with my daughter when she is having challenges with her mental health. And trust me, it goes over not very well. So instead, what we want to do is we want to acknowledge the person's feelings without trying to solve them. So again, saying something like, "It sounds really tough, and thank you for sharing it with me." And that's it, okay? It's also important when we engage in these conversations to know when to refer someone to help. While it's important to be a supportive leader, it is equally important to recognize when someone needs professional help. So this is a great time to familiarize yourself with local mental health resources, whether that is counselors, hotlines, or employee assistance programs. A lot of the veterinary medical associations have employee assistance programs or counseling programs. Have those resources at the ready. Again, it's not that you're telling the individual to do this, that they must see a counselor, but you're offering to share these resources with them. So for example, you might say, "Have you ever considered talking to a counselor? I can help you find one if that would be helpful," right? Or, "This is a great opportunity for self-disclosure. You know, when I was going through a really tough time last year, I used our EAP and I found it really helpful. Do you want me to share those resources with you?" Okay, so this is a really great opportunity again to connect based on your shared experience. We don't want to make it about us. So you don't want to turn it around and say, "Oh my gosh, if you think that's bad, wait till you hear what I went through last year." No, because that again makes this person feel dismissed in terms of their experience. But it's okay for you to share that you get what they're going through and perhaps offer something that might be helpful. Again, we don't want to be prescriptive. We don't want to say, "Well, it's clear that you need to talk to a counselor." We just want to put it out there and offer it up as something to consider. Now, I don't want to go without saying the role of workplace culture when it comes to having these mental health conversations. Mental health conversations don't happen in a vacuum. They are really influenced by the culture in the practice or in the workplace. And research from the Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing Study shows that veterinarians who work in a supportive environment are less likely to experience psychological distress. So what does that healthy workplace culture or that supportive environment look like? Well, they've identified 4 key factors. And the first is a strong sense of belonging to a team. The second is a high level of trust in leadership and the organization. The third is open and candid communication, and that includes communication about our mental health. And then the fourth, which was especially important for new graduates, was sufficient time to provide high-quality patient care. So as members of the team, we all have a role to play in fostering this type of culture. It doesn't matter if you're the owner, a leader, a new grad, or an assistant in the practice, you can contribute to that open and candid communication by showing empathy and advocating for these conversations around mental health in order to promote mental well-being. So again, I'm going to share with you some additional tips for starting these conversations. First and foremost, you want to choose the right time and place, right? Ideally, this is in a quiet, private setting where you won't be interrupted. We don't want to bring up sensitive topics during busy or stressful moments or in front of the entire team. Another important tidbit is to use I statements. So rather than saying, "You seem off," "You aren't yourself," those types of things, you begin with I. So for example, "I've noticed you seem a bit stressed lately and I wanted to check in. How are you doing?" Okay, so yes, there is a you word in there, but most of it is coming from your experience, your observations, and your actions. It just is a little bit less antagonistic compared to using a lot of yous. The other piece of advice I would give you is to be patient. Not everybody's going to feel comfortable opening up right away. So it's important for you to just let them know you're there and to follow up later if needed. You can also offer specific supports. This is really important, not just for people with mental health challenges, but also for people that are grieving. Instead of saying, let me know if you need anything, try offering something concrete. So for example, would it help if I took over this case for you today? Or would it be helpful for you to leave your shift early? Right? These are concrete things that a person can tangibly answer yes or no to, rather than just opening it up for them to have to put their mind together to figure it out in terms of what they need. Now, I would be remiss to not mention the many programs that are out there to help others build skills for navigating mental health conversations and fostering that culture of well-being. There are some excellent programs designed to help, and one standout program is the Working Mind, which I am proud to be a facilitator of through the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the Working Mind is an evidence-based education program developed by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It was originally designed to reduce stigma around mental health and increase awareness of mental health challenges, and also provide participants with practical tools to support themselves and others. So this program is particularly relevant for veterinary professionals, of course, given the high prevalence of mental health struggles in our field. And it uses a combination of interactive learning, discussions, and different tools to address those common barriers to help seeking and to also promote resilience. So one of the tools that the Working Mind uses is a continuum-based approach to mental health, which emphasizes that mental wellness is not a fixed state. It's not a dichotomy. You're not either mentally healthy or mentally ill. Instead, it is a spectrum ranging from being healthy to being in crisis. And every single one of us moves back and forth along this continuum, depending on the day, depending on the factors, and depending on what's going on for us. So by learning to recognize these signs of distress in ourselves and in others, that gives us the knowingness as to when we should intervene and to offer that support. And of course, one of the key goals of the programs is to break down stigma by normalizing conversations around mental health, by fostering an open dialogue. And so participants leave the program empowered to address mental health in their personal and professional lives and to have these conversations. So I'm really proud to say that through the CVMA, the Working Mind is available to veterinarians, veterinary technicians, and any team members who want to engage in this training. And the program is delivered virtually and is available in two versions. There is a version for employees, which focuses on equipping team members with tools to manage their own mental health and to recognize when their colleagues might be needing support. There's also a program for managers and leaders where they get additional training on how to create those psychologically safe workplaces and also how to support team members experiencing those mental health challenges. And of course, modeling healthy behaviors to set the tone for their teams. So by participating in this program, veterinary professionals not only gain the valuable skills that allow them to have these conversations, but also this contributes to a larger cultural shift within the profession. So I mentioned that I'm a facilitator, and for the last several months, I've had the privilege of working with veterinary professionals across Canada and even some from the US who have taken the Working Mind program. And I can tell you that it is incredible to see the light bulb moments that occur when the participants realize that they're not alone and that they now have the tools to make meaningful changes with themselves and with their team. So if you or your team are interested in learning more about the Working Mind or signing up for a session, I encourage you to visit the link that I will provide in the show notes. And I can tell you that investing in programs like this is a powerful step towards creating a veterinary profession where we can openly discuss mental health, diminish stigma, and where everyone feels empowered to thrive. So navigating mental health conversations isn't easy, but it is one of the most powerful ways that we can support each other in the profession. So remember, you don't need to have all the answers or be a mental health expert. Sometimes just being present and listening and asking the questions is enough. So that's it for this episode of Reviving Vet Med. I encourage you to think about how you can make mental health conversations a part of your everyday practice. Whether it's checking in with a colleague or sharing your own experiences, every small action makes a difference. If you found this episode helpful, please take a moment to forward it to a friend or a coworker who you think would benefit from listening. As well, we would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast. That makes sure that you get the new episodes as soon as they're released. You can also follow us on social media at Reviving Vet Med for more tips and strategies for well-being in vet medicine. And if you have any questions about today's episode, suggestions for future podcast topics, or inquiries about sponsoring the podcast, please email us at podcast@revivingvetmed.com. I'd like to thank the team at Bear Beat Productions for producing this episode, and I'd also like to thank you for listening. I hope you'll tune in next time. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Bye for now.